My server room is always kept at exactly 65 degrees. It is a controlled environment, predictable, safe, but at 11:42 p.m. On a Tuesday, the blue light of my phone split the darkness like a system malfunction. The contact name read Mother. We hadn't spoken in 730 days. There was no greeting. No, how are you? Just a directive. We need the transfer by tomorrow morning. $300,000. Don't be selfish. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I simply stared at the screen, examining the audacity the way I would dissect a strand of malicious code. Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. To understand why I didn't delete the message immediately, you have to understand the architecture of my family. We grew up in the shadow of Silicon Valley, where value is determined by perception, not utility. In the operating system of our household, my sister Taylor was the user interface. She was vibrant, loud, and aesthetically pleasing. She was engineered for public consumption. I was the backend code. I kept the servers running. I patched the bugs, but I was never meant to be seen. For years, I calculated the probability of their love, trying to solve the variable of why I was the error. It took me a decade to debug their psychology. It wasn't that they loved Taylor more. It was a textbook case of narcissistic projection. When my parents looked at Taylor, they saw the fame and adoration they believed they deserved. She was a mirror reflecting their vanity. When they looked at me with grease-stained fingers and late-night coding sessions, they saw the labor they resented. I was a mirror reflecting their mediocrity. They didn't despise me because I wasn't enough. They despised me because I was too real. The fatal error occurred when I was 18. I had been accepted into an elite condensed coding program at MIT. It was my escape protocol. The tuition was steep, but the placement rate was 100%. I laid out the data for my parents at the dinner table. My father, Daniel, didn't even lift his gaze from his phone. He said coding was a boy's pastime. He called it antisocial. Then he used a phrase that would become the core code of my trauma. He said, "Savannah, we don't invest in hobbies. It is bad ROI. Return on investment." He spoke about my education like it was a declining stock. I accepted the rejection as a practical financial constraint. Until 7 days later, I came home to find the living room filled with photographers and stylists. My mother, Rebecca, was radiant. They were shooting Taylor's modeling portfolio. They had flown in a team from Lowe's Angels. I found the invoice on the counter, $50,000 for headshots of a 19-year-old whose only talent was looking bored in expensive clothes. When I asked my mother about the budget, she smiled and said, "This isn't spending, Savannah. This is brand building. This is an investment." That was the day my firewall activated. I packed my bag. I didn't cry. I called the only venture capitalist in the family who valued function over form, Aunt Patricia. She didn't offer me a hug or empty reassurances. She wired the tuition directly to the school the next morning. She called it seed funding. She told me that one day the market would correct itself and my parents would realize they backed the wrong asset. She was right, but I never expected the correction to cost $300,000. 9 years later, I live in the Los Altos Hills. My house is not a home. It is a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the Silicon Valley fog. I designed the security protocols myself. Biometric scanners, pressure sensors, and a firewall capable of deflecting a nation-state attack. I constructed this life to be impenetrable. But on a Tuesday afternoon, my perimeter was breached by a white Range Rover that reeked of performative wealth. I watched them through the security monitors. My father, Daniel, wore a suit a size too small. My mother, Rebecca, checked her reflection in the car window, and Taylor. She stepped out looking like a walking Instagram filter, phone raised, recording a story before she even rang the bell. I hadn't spoken to them since the day I left for MIT. I should have engaged the locks. I should have called the police. But curiosity is a hacker's fatal flaw. I wanted to inspect the payload they were carrying. I buzzed the gate. They didn't hug me when they entered. They didn't ask how I was. They walked into my living room like real estate appraisers evaluating a distressed property. My mother dragged her hand along my Italian slate countertop, checking for dust. My father calculated the square footage with his eyes. That was the moment I understood the glitch. For years, I believed they ignored me because I had no value to them. But standing there, watching them evaluate my life, I realized the truth was far colder. They were here because 2 weeks ago, I was featured on the cover of a major tech magazine under the headline, The 30 Under 30 Who Secure the Internet. They didn't return for reconciliation. They returned because I had finally matured. I was no longer a liability. I was a high-value asset ready for harvest. The cost of my visibility was their return. We sat in the living room. The air felt clinical. Taylor spoke first. She didn't ask about my company. She flashed a ring heavy enough to strain her wrist. She announced she was marrying James, a tech venture capitalist with a portfolio worth millions. But there was an issue. James had expectations. His social circle required a certain level of aesthetic precision. My mother took control of the pitch. She explained that the wedding wasn't just a ceremony. It was a viral brand activation for Taylor's new lifestyle company. They needed a venue in Napa. They needed a celebrity photographer. They needed a drone show. The budget was $600,000. They had promised James and his family they would cover half, but of course they didn't have $300,000. My father leaned forward, elbows on knees, attempting to look paternal. He said, "Savannah, we know we've had our differences, but this is your sister's big break. James is the real deal. If she secures him, we're all set. We need you to cover our half. Consider it retroactive family dues for the years you didn't contribute to the household while you were off building your little empire. Retroactive family dues." They wanted $300,000 to purchase my sister a husband, and they were invoicing me for the childhood they neglected. I looked at Taylor. She wasn't even looking at me. She was typing on her phone, bored, waiting for the transfer to clear so she could resume her content. I stood by the window, watching the fog spill over the hills. But my attention was fixed entirely on the three people sitting on my custom sofa. $300,000, I said, my voice level, for a party. It's not just a party, Taylor snapped, finally lifting her gaze. It's networking, it's brand equity. You wouldn't understand because you don't have a personal brand. You just have computers. My mother, sensing the tension, shifted to her preferred tactic, emotional manipulation disguised as maternal concern. "Savannah, darling," she said, her voice softening. "We know we weren't perfect, we know we were hard on you, but we fed you, we clothed you, we gave you a safe home." My father followed, his tone hardening. "Look, we're not asking for charity. We're asking for family unity. You have more money than you know what to do with. You're sitting on a fortune while your sister is trying to build a life. Don't be greedy, greedy." The word lingered in the air like a contaminant. I walked to the coffee table and picked up my tablet. I didn't engage with their guilt. I didn't justify my choices. I activated the karmic boomerang. I looked my father directly in the eyes, mirroring the indifference he had shown me 9 years earlier at the dinner table. "I understand your position," I said calmly. "You want me to invest $300,000 into Taylor's wedding to secure her social standing, but I have to evaluate the data." I let the silence stretch until it grew uncomfortable. "And the data indicates this is a high-risk venture with zero tangible assets. Taylor has no equity, no product, and her brand is entirely speculative." I turned to my mother. "You taught me a critical lesson about financial discipline. Rebecca, you taught me that resources should only be allocated to ventures with proven returns." Then I faced my father. "So to quote you directly, I don't invest in hobbies. It is bad ROI. The room fell silent. The pressure shifted. Taylor's jaw dropped. My father's face darkened to a dangerous shade of purple. My mother looked as if I had struck her. "What did you just say?" Taylor shrieked, jumping up so quickly she knocked over a vase. "You jealous incel, you robot. You're just mad because no one would ever pay $300,000 to marry you. You're going to die alone with your servers." My father stood, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You ungrateful little, you will regret this. You think you're untouchable in your glass tower? We made you and we can break you." I didn't flinch. I tapped a single button on my tablet. "Security," I said into the intercom. "Escort 3 individuals from the premises. They are trespassing." 2 large men in black suits appeared within seconds. My family did not leave quietly. They shouted threats and insults until the heavy steel door clicked shut, sealing my fortress once again. The silence that followed their departure wasn't peaceful. It was dense like the air before a storm. I didn't return to work. Instead, I went into incident response mode. In cybersecurity, when you detect a breach, you don't just patch the hole. You investigate the source. Why were they so desperate? $300,000 was a specific large sum. It wasn't just wedding expenses. It felt like a ransom. The first wave of the attack came 3 hours later. Taylor posted a video on TikTok. She was crying perfectly lit, of course, talking about financial abuse and toxic sisters who hoard wealth while family suffers. She didn't name me, but she tagged my company in the comments. Within minutes, my PR team was pinging me. Clients were calling asking about the allegations. I didn't respond to the comments. I didn't issue a statement. I treated Taylor's post as a phishing attempt distraction designed to make me react emotionally. Instead, I went deeper. I ran a background check on James, the fiancé. On paper, he was perfect. Tech venture capitalist, Stanford grad, portfolio worth millions. But when I cross-referenced his public filings with my parents' financial activity, I found a discrepancy. James wasn't just rich, he was paranoid. His previous engagement had ended in a messy lawsuit over assets. He was known in the Valley for his ironclad prenups. I dug into the wedding planning forums Taylor frequented. I found a thread from a user matching her handle asking about proof of assets for a marriage contract. The timestamp was 2 months ago. I kept digging. I accessed public records, cross-referencing my parents' names with recent legal filings. Nothing. Then I checked corporate filings, and there it was, a new LLC formed 6 weeks ago. Taylor Made Ventures. The registered agent was my father, but the operating agreement, that was the anomaly. I couldn't access the private document, but the filing fee was paid from an account I recognized. It was an old joint account my parents had used for my college fund, the one they said was empty. Why form an LLC right before a wedding? Why need $300,000 cash immediately? I started mapping the network. James Taylor, the LLC, the wedding, the money. It was a puzzle, and I was missing one piece. I needed to see the prenup. I needed to know what they had promised him. I sat back in my chair, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating my face. They weren't just greedy, they were terrified. They had promised James something they couldn't deliver, and they needed my money to buy it. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was social engineering, and I was about to find the exploit. I went hunting for the zero-day exploit, the vulnerability that had been sitting in my system undetected, waiting to be weaponized. I knew my parents weren't sophisticated enough to hack my company directly. They were social engineers, not coders. They relied on human error. And I realized with a sinking feeling that I was the error. I hadn't changed my personal cloud passwords since college because I never used those accounts. It was a digital storage locker for old family photos and tax returns I'd forgotten about. I logged in. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I saw the recent activity log. A folder had been accessed 3 days ago. Inside was a single PDF file titled Asset Declaration James Prenup PDF. I opened the file. The world around me narrowed down to the pixels on my screen. It was a financial disclosure form for James' lawyers. It listed Taylor's assets, her checking account, $4,000, her car leased, and then under business interests. There it was, a line item that made my blood run cold: 15% equity ownership in Savannah Tech Solutions, co-founder status. I scrolled down. Attached to the disclosure was a shareholder agreement. It was dated 5 years ago. It claimed that Taylor had provided the initial angel investment of $50,000 to launch my company, the exact amount they had spent on her modeling portfolio. At the bottom of the page was a signature. It was my name. It looked exactly like my signature. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. They hadn't just lied about the wedding budget. They had stolen my company, or at least they were trying to. They had forged a legal document claiming my sister owned a piece of my life's work. They were using my success, my sleepless nights, my blood and sweat as a dowry to buy her a rich husband. Suddenly, the $300,000 made sense. It wasn't for catering or a drone show. It was a capital contribution. James' lawyers must have asked for proof of her ownership, a dividend payment, a distribution, something to show the equity was real. They needed to deposit a large sum into Taylor's account immediately to make it look like a payout from the company. They were asking me to fund my own theft. This wasn't just a family betrayal. This was corporate fraud. It was a federal crime. They were defrauding an investor, James, and falsifying corporate records. If I signed anything, if I gave them a single cent, I would be complicit. They weren't just asking for money. They were asking me to validate a lie that could destroy my entire career. I looked at the timestamp on the document. It was created 6 weeks ago. They had been planning this for months. While I was working, while I was building, they were drafting the architecture of my destruction. I felt a cold, hard clarity settle over me. There would be no more arguments, no more emotional appeals. You don't argue with a virus, you purge it. I printed the document. Then I printed the real incorporation papers, the ones that listed me as the sole owner, solely funded by Aunt Patricia. I grabbed a red pen. I was going to need a physical meeting, not to negotiate, but to deliver the final patch. I picked up my phone and texted my mother. I'll bring the check, have James there. I want to toast the happy couple. They thought they had won. They thought the malware had taken root. They didn't know I was about to reformat the drive. I drove to my parents' house for the final confrontation. It was a staging ground for their lies. Perfectly manicured lawn, fresh paint, a facade of suburban success hiding the rot in the foundation. When I walked in, the mood was manic. My mother had champagne on ice. Taylor was vibrating with nervous energy, and there was James the Mark standing by the fireplace looking relieved. Savannah, James said, stepping forward to shake my hand. He had a firm grip, the kind you expect from a man who manages risk for a living. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. Taylor explained that you were just waiting for the right moment to formalize the equity transfer. It means a lot to have the family fully invested. He thought this was a business meeting. He thought I was there to sign off on the lie, to confirm that Taylor was my silent partner, justifying the $300,000 distribution they needed to pay for the wedding. Let's just get the paperwork out of the way, Taylor said, her voice high and tight. She thrust a pen at me. On the coffee table lay the forged shareholder agreement and a new document, a ratification of ownership. All I had to do was sign, and I would be an accessory to fraud. I would be legally binding myself to a parasite for the rest of my life. Time seemed to slow down. I looked at my mother, Rebecca. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the pen in my hand, her eyes hungry. I looked at my father, Daniel, who gave me a nod that was supposed to be encouraging, but looked more like a threat. For years, I had hesitated to cut them off completely. I had let their calls go to voicemail, but never blocked the numbers. I had kept the door slightly ajar because society installs a very specific code in us from birth. Family is everything. Blood is thicker than water. You only get one mother. It's a guilt algorithm designed to keep you compliant. But standing there holding the pen that would sign away my freedom, the code finally broke. I realized that family isn't a DNA match. It's an action, it is safety, it is support, it is mutual respect. What stood before me wasn't family. It was a group of strangers who shared my genetic data and used it to exploit me. Protecting them wasn't nobility, it was self-destruction. To save the system, I had to delete the corrupted files. I had to burn the bridge to stop the enemy from crossing. I capped the pen. I think there's been a misunderstanding, James, I said. The room went dead silent. What? Taylor whispered. I opened my briefcase. I didn't take out a check. I took out a thick stack of stapled documents. I handed the first set to James. This is the certificate of incorporation for Savannah Tech Solutions dated 5 years ago. I said, my voice clinical. You'll notice there is only one shareholder listed me. You'll also see the initial capitalization records. The $50,000 didn't come from Taylor. It came from a private loan from Patricia Evans. My Aunt James took the papers, his brow furrowed as he scanned the dates. I don't understand, is a forgery, I said. I pulled out the forensic analysis I'd run on the digital file. The signature on the document Taylor gave you was lifted from a birthday card I sent her 3 years ago. It's a digital copy-paste. Taylor owns 0% of my company. She never has and she never will. Savannah, stop, my father shouted, lunging forward. James, she's lying, she's jealous, she's trying to sabotage. Sit down, Daniel, I said, not raising my voice. I pulled out the second document. This is a notification I have just filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding attempted corporate fraud and identity theft. And this, I handed a final envelope to my father, is a cease and desist order from my legal team. If you or Taylor ever claim affiliation with my company again, or if you attempt to solicit funds based on my assets, I will press criminal charges. I turned back to James. He was pale. He was looking at Taylor, who was now sobbing, not with sorrow, but with the terrified realization that the game was over. She looked small. She looked like a glitch. James, I said, you're a smart investor. You know what due diligence looks like. You were being sold a shell company. I suggest you audit the rest of the relationship before you sign a marriage license. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't wait for the screaming to start. I turned around and walked out the door. I left the champagne on ice. I left the forgery on the table. I walked out into the cool night air, and for the first time in 27 years, I didn't feel heavy. I felt empty in the best possible way. The purge was complete. The fallout was rapid and total. A a system collapse that I watched from a safe distance. James called off the wedding 48 hours later. He didn't just walk away, he ran. He issued a public statement clarifying that he had no business ties to Taylor Made Ventures, effectively blacklisting my father in the Valley. Taylor's social media empire crumbled. When the truth about the fraud leaked, not from me, but from James' legal team, her followers turned on her. She went private, deleting her accounts, disappearing into the digital void she used to worship. My parents are facing legal fees that will likely cost them their home. They tried to call me once from a burner phone. I didn't answer. I didn't block the number either. I just let it ring until it stopped. I returned to my fortress in the hills. The silence used to feel lonely, but now it feels like victory. I called Aunt Patricia. We didn't talk about them. We talked about the future. We talked about the new scholarship fund I was launching for girls in coding. Girls who were told their dreams were just hobbies. I walked into my server room. The hum of the cooling fans was the only sound. I looked at the racks of blinking lights, the data streams flowing seamlessly, logical and clean. I realized then that I hadn't lost a family. I had simply secured my network. I had identified the threat, isolated it, and removed it. My life is code. It is either 0 or 1, true or false. There is no room for gray areas, and there is no room for people who only love you when you pay for it. I am the architect of my own system now, and it is finally stable. Have you ever had to be the villain in someone else's story just to save your own? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe in choosing your own family, share this video.